lose 5 points on the grade. I'm taking names. Take your names. Doc has a lot to cover, and we want to hear what he has to say. Those of you that weren't or didn't listen to me last night, the caliber of man that we have here today. I want to brag about you. Okay? I don't know if you've noticed. We throw a picture up here and he just starts, there's no notes up here. It's just amazing what God has blessed in this man's brain. But those of you that have been to the Holy Land, he built the model of Jerusalem. Okay? New King James Bible, helped translate it.
Wow.
The models that are back there, he built just for our class. So, I mean, this is who God brought us.
But when I was your age, I had done nothing. And I was never outside Philadelphia. Until I went to the Army, I was never outside the city. I didn't have a car. And I was...
You made up for lost time.
The second missionary journey. The second missionary journey, they go through the first areas, Galatia, which is central Turkey, and then remember God leads them into Philippi, and notice that the cities you want to notice is Philippi, Thessalonica, then it says they went to Berea, then he goes to Athens and Corinth. Corinth is down here. Greece is made up, they call this part of Greece, in the New Testament times, they call this Macedonia. This is called Thrace, Lydia, but basically they call the whole thing up here Macedonia, and then this part they call it Greece. We call it all Greece. This was Greece, and then this part is Achaia. Achaia has Corinth in there, across from it Caesarea, and it has Mycenae, for those who remember the Trojan War, where they went over here, and then the Spartans were all in Achaia. They were called Achaeans. Greek civilization, by the way, we talk about citizenship, and Greeks were citizens of their city. Greek loyalty was to their city. Greeks, remember you didn't travel as much, you didn't have cars and all that. Greeks, until the Persian Wars, had no loyalty to Greece. Their loyalty was to their city. Soldiers swore allegiance to their city. The cities often got in fights. But Greeks were loyal to their city. They were not loyal. They didn't have a nationality. Americans are the opposite. We don't see anybody here, in a fist fight because he said Toledo is not as good as Scalps Level, Arkansas. We don't see people arguing about their city. I don't know if I've ever had somebody come up and yell at me because I'm from Philadelphia. They say they're from Runnymede, New Jersey. It's like, so what? But we're loyal to the nation. Greeks were not loyal to the nation. They didn't travel that. They were loyal to their city. Anyway, Thessalonica here. And in the second missionary journey, Paul wrote, he went down to Athens, but remember he was chased out of Thessalonica for preaching the gospel, but many believed. And when he was in Athens, he sent Timothy to find out how they were doing, and he wrote 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians were written on the second missionary journey. Galatians was written after the first. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are written after during the second missionary journey from Athens, and they have the second coming of Christ is mentioned in every chapter of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. They're called the eschatological epistles. Anyway, he goes down here, he gives a sermon to Athens, and we have all that. And then here's Corinth, on this island of Achaia. There's a land bridge that you can go. Athens and Corinth are very close. And all kinds of things happened at Corinth. There's a giant temple at Corinth, and they had a temple on top of a mountain. And every night from this heathen temple, they'd have a parade by torchlight. The priest and the women priests would come down the path, and they'd have a parade every night. a wild kind of town. And then he sailed over to Ephesus. So you notice the big cities of the New Testament. Paul went basically to big cities. We have Philippi, Thessalonica, Athens, Corinth, Ephesus. The Greek world of the New Testament revolved around the Aegean Sea. Aegean. The Aegean Sea was the Greek world. The top of it, you see, was Macedonia, Asia on the east, Greece on the west, Crete was the lower island here, and it was a circle, but the Greek world revolves around the Aegean Sea. On the other side of Greece, we have up here the Adriatic Sea and the Ionian Sea, and then we have Italy. And by the way, just the way it happened in history, the Greeks just didn't have much on this side, western side of Greece, and the Romans didn't bother them, the Italians didn't bother them, so in the Adriatic Sea, almost nothing went on historically. Maybe peaceful, fishing people, they fished and boated, and I don't know what, but nothing much happened. But you ought to know the names, Aegean Sea, the Adriatic, and then Italy is down here, and in the middle of Italy, on the west side, is the great capital, Rome. And Rome is on what part? It's all the Mediterranean. What sea is Rome on? It's on the big Mediterranean, and it's called the Tyrrhenian Sea. And you know, you think you're going to cover all this. Anyway, that is a question. Honestly, no joke. That is a question I ask. You ought to know Rome is on the Tyrrhenian Sea. Multiple choice, you know, it says something like Rome is on the Aegean, not so, the Adriatic, not so, Tyrrhenian, yes, I don't know what order. And it may say Lake Fayoum in Egypt. Of course not. Rome is on the Tyrrhenian Sea. Almost nobody knows that. Now, how will that bless your spiritual life tomorrow? I don't know. But good to know. Okay, next. Oh wait, the third missionary journey. The third missionary journey, notice he starts from Antioch. They only go to Cyprus this time, but they go through Galatia again. Notice, he preaches the gospel in Galatia, first missionary journey. Second missionary journey, he visits it again. Third missionary journey, he visits again. It shows us a pattern of follow-up and care. And then he goes back to Philippi, where he's preached, visits it again in the third missionary journey. Goes over to Thessalonica, visits again. Goes to Athens, Corinth. He spends about a year or so in Corinth. And then, instead on the third missionary journey, instead of sailing to Ephesus, like on the second, goes back around again. So, first missionary journey, second missionary journey, around and across. Second missionary journey is a circle, back. Third missionary journey, it's like an upside down U. He goes around to Corinth and then back around the land. Apparently he wants to visit Thessalonica again, Macedonia again, Philippi. And by the way, I told you Philippi was where they found the gold. Rich city for a lot of reasons. The epistle to the Philippians, you'll notice part of its purpose is to thank the Philippians for sending him a gift. They're the ones who supported his missionary work with money. And he says, you sent me another gift. And he says, not that I need the money, but he says, I want you to have the blessing of God's reward for what you're doing. And so one of the purposes of the epistle to the Philippians is to thank them for the gift. And it's not an accident, we surmise, that it's a rich city. It's the city of gold. So he thanks them. That doesn't mean everybody was rich there. But then he goes around in Ephesus. He said, I fought with lions with Ephesus. There were riots. Remember the silversmith riots and all that. Ephesus today, if you can get there, and you can if you take a cruise or just visit, Ephesus is still there in magnificence. You walk in blocks of ancient temples, blocks of ancient buildings. Ephesus is a city that's really still there. It's one of the great cities of the world, of ancient world, that's still there. You can visit now, as the port is called Kusadasi, the Turkish name, but you visit Ephesus and there are always people from tours and bus tours and Greek tours, and you'll see Japanese and Korean visited, and from the boat tours. But Ephesus is a great place to visit because the city's still there. Now, for whatever reason, Philippi, the temple has been destroyed and you just see rocks. But at Ephesus, you see the stadium where they had the riot that's described in the book of Acts. It's still there in good condition and shocking, and they have concerts there. So Ephesus is one of the great places to see. We're talking about blocks of buildings, and they even had outdoor toilets. And for some reason, I don't know, it seems to fascinate some people. When we were there recently, or one time we were there was a group of girls from Canada on a trip, and they wanted a big picture, forgive me, sitting on the outdoor toilets. I don't know why they thought that was great, but they had their group picture. It'd be not my choice. You know, there's a library. You can get a picture in front of the library. Who wants to say that's me on the third toilet? And they had toilets with running water. They didn't have a flush handle, but the idea was they had water directed that was continually flowing below. It is a wow. The ancients were, humans were always great engineers and brilliant and workers. But in Egypt it's stone. Okay, so the third missionary journey, they go up and back, and thus back to, and then he's arrested. Okay, from the third way back, back one. The third missionary journey, Paul wrote from, he went on the third missionary journey, he goes first, he's here at Ephesus, see? Anyway, he's at Ephesus, and he wrote the 1 Corinthians. He wrote 1 Corinthians from Ephesus on the third missionary journey. He goes up to Philippi and he writes 2 Corinthians. He goes down to Corinth and he writes Romans. So the third missionary journey, he writes the three great epistles. First he writes now in the Bible they put Romans first because Romans is like the theological account of what Christianity believes and is. First and Second Corinthians are like how to deal with church problems and what comes up. But the order of writing, in fact, that's one of the questions. The order of writing is 1 Corinthians, written from Ephesus, 2 Corinthians, written from Philippi, and Romans, written from Corinth. And we know it because of this. At the end of 1 Corinthians, he says, in Ephesus, we're starting a collection. We're starting a collection. And we hope that the people of Macedonia, they have put aside money. Then when he's in Philippi, he says, the people of Macedonia have given a lot of funds. They're going to take to Jerusalem because they're having a famine there. And then at Corinth, in the end of Romans, he says, we're done the collection, and I'd like to come to Rome, but first I have to go to Jerusalem to deliver the collection. So we know the order. It's 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Romans, because of the collection. We're starting the collection, 1 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians, we're in the midst of it. The people of Macedonia have been generous. And then Romans, we're done the collection. We're at Corinth, I have to deliver it. And then after I deliver it to Jerusalem, which would take months, well, I'll come to Rome. So from those little things, we're very clear on that. The order is 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Romans. Talk of that. That's the whole. Next. Remember remember Paul, and then later he's arrested after the third missionary journey. He's arrested in Jerusalem. He's kept 2 years in Caesarea, awaiting trial. Finally, he appeals to Rome, and they send him to Rome. And Acts 27 is the chapter of the boat and the shipwreck to going to Rome. And here it says they sailed, and interesting enough, by the way, I should mention that it's said in the third missionary journey, we don't have to go back, but in the third missionary journey, when the book of Acts says Luke was, he meets Luke, the physician at Troas, which is right up here on the western coast of Asia or Turkey. After he meets Luke at Troas in the book of Acts, and you know, Luke wrote the book of Acts, and he wrote the Gospel of Luke. And the Gospel of Luke is the longest book in the New Testament. It's Matthew has 28 chapters, Luke 24, but Luke is a longer book. After he meets Luke at Troas, Luke travels with him. And the narrative in the book of Acts, before he meets Luke, in I think it's Acts 18, it says Paul did this, he sailed here, he went here, he sailed here. Then, when it says he got to Troas, Luke says, we sailed over to Neapolis and Philippi. We did this, we did this. It's the we passages because now Luke is with him. And it converts immediately from the city of Luke. It starts, we did this, we sailed, we did this, so we can follow that Luke the physician is with him. They're called the we passages, not we, W-E-E, small, but Luke is with him. Now, a German guy named Heinrich Schliemann, nobody here named Heinrich Schliemann, not a Brazilian name, or whatever. Heinrich Schliemann saw in the book of Acts around 1900, German banker, he saw in the book of Acts, he said Troas, he said, I'll bet that's Mycenae is right here, and they sailed to Troy. This German banker, reading the New Testament, said Troas, the city of Luke, I bet that's Troy. And he gathered money, got donations and investors, and he sailed to Troy, German guy, and he said he was going to find ancient Troy. Well, he was the laughing stock of Europe. Everybody said this ignoramus banker suddenly makes himself an archaeologist. He's no scholar, he's a banker, what's he know? He's going to waste everybody's money, investors, because he's looking in the Bible, he sees Troas, and he thinks Troas sounds like Troy. And guess what happened? He was right. He found Troy, and he found all kinds of gold and archaeological things, and he becomes the #1 archaeologist in the world. And then he said, if Troy is true, even though Homer wrote, things late and added a lot of stories, he said, if Troy is true, the invaders came from Mycenae in Achaia. So he said, I'm going to find Mycenae. And he comes next to Achaia, he starts digging up there, and he finds the ancient city of Mycenae. So one of the great archaeologists of the last 150 years, Heinrich Schliemann, was not an archaeologist. He didn't take archaeology courses. He was a banker. He was an accountant. But because of what he read in the New Testament, even though everybody made fun of him, he found ancient Troy. So now nobody questions that there was a Trojan War, but we know that Homer, wrote it up later with a lot of flowery things. But so much for that. Now, it says in the book of Acts that they sailed, it says at the time they were sailing in winter, the winds shift and start to blow. They come from the northeast, and a lot of times there are storms that come from the northeast and blow you this way. They blow you this way. So it says they started to sail, and it says they went north of Cyprus. They got another boat here, and the Roman centurion, who Paul was the prisoner, could command whatever ship he wanted. And he said they sailed here, and the wind was blowing them down here, and they landed at Fair Havens. Fair Havens in the south of Crete. It's like Greenland. You know, Greenland is not green, it's icy. They named it Greenland to attract people. But Greenland is not green. It's ice. It's not happy. Fair Havens is a wreck. They named it Fair Havens, I guess, to make it sound great. You know, there's some towns around here that are called harbor, and they're not near the water. But it makes people want to buy and invest. So, in fact, one of the professors when I was in Philadelphia, teaching at Faith Seminary, Dr. Newman said, I saw this ad at what Florida land, and he said they cheated me. I paid about 5 times more than I should have. He said I was cheated. He said I kept it for about 15 years, went down there, and he said I sold it and made a fortune. So sometimes it works okay if you hold it. He says they cheated me, but in the end they didn't cheat me. I did well. But be careful when you buy that. You may buy it in Crocodilopolis. Now, they landed at Fair Havens, and Paul said they need to stop. They can't take a ship because the storms will blow them out. They'll never go around to Rome. See the Tyrrhenian Sea? Tyrrhenian, Tyrrhenian Sea. Here's the Adriatic, the Tyrrhenian Sea. Rome is on the Tyrrhenian Sea. Anyway, they were at Fair Havens. Acts 27 says, Fair Havens is no place. But there's a city at the end of Crete, this is Crete, called Phoenix. And Phoenix was a great city, a harbor, and it had places of really, in the ancient world, gambling, and it was a fun city. So Phoenix is your fun city, spring break. Fair Havens is nowhere special. And so it said the sailors all said, let's see if we can't sail about 55 miles and make Phoenix. And it'll be a great place if we have to spend 2 months or a month. We want to go to Phoenix, and I don't know if they had a vote, and the sailors are yelling, we Phoenix, Phoenix, Phoenix. And Paul said, don't do it. The winds are blowing. I've been sailing, you know these missionary journeys. He says it'll be a storm. You won't make it. And it said the centurion and the captain of the ship listened to the crowd and not to Paul. Hey, you're a religious guy. You know, be quiet. You don't know. Well, these sailors know. Paul said, no, I know. Anyway, they followed the sailors. And so it says in the book of Acts, and there's like a lesson, that they sailed for a while and the wind was kind of with them, and they thought they made it. And you can imagine on the ship, see, Paul, you don't really know everything, do you? Paul, oh, we won't make it. Paul. But it says suddenly there came a wind that names it Euroclydon. See, Europe, Euroclydon, and the wind blew this way, and as they were sailing toward Phoenix, the wind blew them into the Mediterranean Sea, and they never made Phoenix. So sometimes you make a bad decision and it looks okay for a while. I mean, the ideal is make the sensible decision. You know, you pray, of course, as Christians, but make the sensible. I've made a lot of not sensible decisions, but God can work it out. And we lived through it. But for a little while, the bad decision seemed okay. But then the wind came, the storm came, and they had the storm, but God, got them through, and they landed, and they finally got to Rome. Okay, next. Rome, the Tyrrhenian Sea. Rome is in the middle. Here's Corsica. Corsica belongs to France today. Sardinia belongs to Italy. And here's Rome right in the middle. The cities, by the way, you'll notice Rome and Athens. Originally, both cities are like 20 miles inland. Why aren't they on the coast? In fact, you'll read that Athens, its port, is about 20 miles in. It's because that in the ancient world, they don't have TV, they don't have satellites. You didn't know when, they didn't have a world geography. You didn't know when, you'd be invaded by sea people. You didn't know when to be, so you wanted to be away from the shore about 20 miles, and you always had guards in the shore, so if they saw a boat suddenly coming, you know, like with later the Vikings, if boats were suddenly coming, you didn't know they were going to plunder, kill all of you. You had time to send messages to your city 20 miles away, you know, shut the gates, shut the walls, get the soldiers ready, we may be invaded. So you didn't want to have a city right on the water because you might not have enough warning time and you could lose your city. So the big cities like Rome and Athens are about 20 miles in. Next. Okay, we'll go to the next whole thing. Let's
Churches?
Yeah, let's do the churches of Revelation. Just take a moment. The churches of Revelation, an archaeologist named Ramsey discovered the 7 churches of Revelation. First thing we want to notice is, in the book of Revelation, chapters 1 to 3, the 7 churches, there are more than 7 churches in Asia. Now it says, remember, the churches in Asia. Remember, that's Western Turkey is Asia. The main city was, of course, Ephesus, right here. It has churches. Here is Colossae. Remember, Paul wrote a letter to the Colossians?
Mm-hmm.
So my guess is there was probably some Christian meet at Colossae, because in the end of Colossians, he says, say hello to this one, say hello to that one, say hello to this one who has a church in her house, say hello to this woman, say hello to these 2 girl sisters, say hello to this one, say hello to that one. And we don't read that he ever preached in Colossae. So it was like they were probably having a conference. Laodicea is the big city, and south of it is Colossae, north of it is Hierapolis. And in the letter to Colossians and in Ephesians, it says, have this letter read by the church in Colossae and Hierapolis, and also in Laodicea. So we've got Hierapolis and Colossae right near Laodicea. So in other words, there are more than 7 churches in Asia. But God apparently, 7 is the number, in Revelation. There are 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, 7 thunders. So God apparently uses the number 7 to represent a whole cycle. And so 7 churches is really God's message to the church, not only to those churches specifically, but his message to the church of the centuries. And we can learn a lesson in all those 7 churches. But the angel of the Lord, and the Lord writes his letter to 7 because it's symbolical of the entire church. Like the 7 candles or oil stands in the temple were symbolical of the Holy Spirit eternally everywhere. So the 7 churches are, or at least omniscient. So the 7 churches represent the whole Church of Christ, I think, through the ages. And so a guy named Ramsey found that this was the postal route. When they delivered letters, and they had letters. They didn't have postage stamps and all that, but you write a scroll or you write a papyri, and you put the address, you put the city on it. They didn't have zip codes, of course, and you hoped it got there. But Ephesus, to my sister Martha, who lives on City 21 or whatever, and letters took months to go, but there were letters, and Paul, of course, wrote letters. And they delivered letters all to Ephesus. And from Ephesus, they took the letters that went up to Smyrna. And from then, you see, they went over to Sardis, and Thyatira, and Pergamon, and Philadelphia, and Laodicea, and then back to Ephesus. In other words, the 7 churches are the delivery route of the ancient postal center of Asia. They had a postal system. They didn't call it the United Postal System, but they delivered letters. They were sophisticated, but they traveled those 7 cities in that precise order of the book of Revelation. And so that's what the Lord uses to give messages. So, okay, next. Let's jump to number 11, Masada. Okay, they're back.
Back?
Yeah, oh, well, keep it here for a second. Yes, let me mention this. Here's the Dead Sea. If you go to visit Israel, remember Jerusalem is 20 miles west of the northern edge of the Dead Sea. That's one of the questions. Somebody might say, well, by this saying that, we're tricking you to learn it. But in the northern edge of the Dead Sea, here, the northwestern portion corner, is Qumran. Qumran is famous for, that's where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Qumran was a community of Essenes that didn't want to mix with the regular population, Jew or Gentile. It was like we want to be holy, a monastic group before the New Testament, a Jewish monastic group. We want to live a holy life, and we want to be away from the world. And we want to be away from all the people from Brazil and from every other place. And but they copied manuscripts of the Old Testament. And so when the Romans were coming in AD 69, the revolt started in 66 AD, they hid in the caves, the giant, mountains, remember the Anti-Lebanon mountains. They hid in the caves in the mountains beside the Dead Sea in jars. They hid scrolls, Isaiah manuscript, Ezekiel, Obadiah, Genesis, Exodus. They hid them. And they were found again in 1947. But because of the war, with the War of Independence, they didn't really come out till, a long story, till about 1949. But the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Bible manuscripts, were hidden in 69, a year before Jerusalem fell, and they were found again a year before the state of Israel was reconstituted. You got that? Yes. 69, 1947. A year before Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, and a year before Israel was reestablished in 48. In 47 they were found. They were found by a shepherd boy who threw a rock in a cave to try to find his donkey, and he heard a crack, and it was a jar. See, the rock hit a jar, and then they found a manuscript in there. And first, these Arab boys, they knew old manuscripts sold, so they actually took one and ripped it in little pieces, and they went around the town selling the little pieces with old writing. And then people noticed, hey, this writing, this must come back. This is people of the Bible from a couple thousand years old. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls are mainly scrolls copied before the time of Christ. Many of them 100 to 200 years before Christ. And so they establish, the prophecies like Isaiah 53, Psalm 22. They weren't written later by Christians because, well, we have plenty of evidence, Septuagint before that. But the Dead Sea Scrolls became our oldest copies of the Old Testament. Before this, our oldest copies of the Old Testament books were from 1000 AD. You hear that? The Dead Sea Scrolls brought our oldest copies back like 1200 years, from like 200 BC. And what's interesting is the copying was so well done that we didn't have to have a new Bible issued. The Dead Sea Scrolls from before Christ match the manuscripts we have from 1000 AD. So there's no sudden new Bible in the Old Testament. It's the same thing. So the scribes are very careful in copying. Now, it's found in Qumran. They're in caves in the mountains. Somebody says, now you can go there today. By the way, there's hundreds of caves. And it's very steep. So it's not easy. But somebody might say, well, what happens if I go to a cave and find an old manuscript? Well, you probably can sell it for $25,000 to $50,000. But the odds are, you're going to say, I broke my ankle and I didn't find anything. This is a waste. So, but, you know, go to it. Go to it. One person goes to an empty cave. There's a bear in it. Another person finds a manuscript and he's $25,000, $50,000 rich. So, who knows? But there's been a lot of looking, so. But anyway, you'll sometimes hear about the Dead Sea Scrolls. By the way, the Dead Sea Scrolls have Bible manuscripts, which we're interested in, and writing from people, and local writing of the community in Qumran. There was a religious teacher, and he wrote about light versus darkness. Now, you may hear sometimes in certain things, they'll say, send for copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls that your pastor doesn't want you to see. Send $35 for photographs of the Dead Sea Scrolls that your church won't allow you to see. And you say, oh my, what's this? Maybe I'll spend my $35. Half the Dead Sea Scrolls are Bible manuscripts, and the Bible manuscripts, every Bible book in the Old Testament except Esther. And the Qumran community had something against women, and so there still may be a copy of Esther out there. There's a lot of caves, but we didn't get Esther yet. But anyway, every other Bible, the Isaiah manuscripts, there's 2 whole scrolls of Isaiah. They're in the Jewish Museum in Jerusalem. You can see them with your own eyes. They're on the best parchment, the skins from treated skins. They're not on papyri, which is like, you know, bag paper. They're on parchment. They're done with the best ink there is. They're with copyists who copy. It looks like printing. They're readable. You know, when I looked at the Dead Sea Scroll of Isaiah, I read it right off in the Hebrew. You can read it right off. It's good print, good penmanship. In the New Testament manuscripts, we have different problems because a lot of people copied the New Testament who were not professional, who did not have good handwriting, and so there's more what we call variations. But though we have the New Testament. But anyway, in the Old Testament, you can read Isaiah perfectly. It's perfectly clear, the 2 scrolls of Isaiah. Absolutely. Now, in the non-Bible manuscripts, see, and also when we read Isaiah, we know what he's going to say. You know, we have other copies, so if there's a letter that's smeared, we know it. But in Isaiah, there's no smeared letters. Honestly, it's beautiful. But in the non-biblical writings, you know, which your pastor won't let you see, they're letters to people. They're not using the best parchment. So some of the writing materials, papyri, leather, sometimes it's the back of a shoe. They're beat up, they're cracked, they're bacteria. You can't even see it with your eyes. And then the letters are by people who aren't always literate. So you don't know what he's saying. So it's, dear Martha, I'm sending you, now is this word an elephant? Or is it a candy? Or is it a tiger? Or is it, I'm sending you my mother? There are letters missing. The letters aren't made carefully. So the problem is why some of the Dead Sea Scrolls have not been translated. It's not because they're hidden. It's because you can't read them. And you don't know what they're saying. Every now and then somebody would give me a letter and say, I got this letter from Israel in Hebrew. Can you read it for me? Well, if it's perfect penmanship and if it's sensible writing, we can do it. But if it's bad penmanship on an old piece of paper bag, you can't see it. Is this a Y? Is this a Yod? Or is this a Tav? You don't know what it's saying. So the reason much of the Dead Sea Scrolls are not ever translated yet is they're unreadable. It's not because there's any big secret that the world is keeping from you. Okay. Now Masada, the Dead Sea Scrolls are the Qumran, and of course they have stores. Everywhere if you go to Israel they have stores. So so you can buy copies and all that. Qumran. Masada is here. The middle, well, about the 2/3 down the Dead Sea on the western side. And it's a great fortress that Herod built. And I think we have a picture. Next, yeah. There's Masada, the fortress. Herod built a city. Now remember, this Dead Sea Scroll, the Dead Sea is down here. As high, right, 1,300 feet high. It's as high as the Empire State Building. What happens if you jump from here? Right. You know, God forbid, I shouldn't say this, God forbid. Don't, we know some people who committed suicide, some teenagers. The horror it brings to their parents is unspeakable. The sadness it brings to their parents is unspeakable. It pays to talk to your children about suicide, not to. And sometimes teenagers get wrought up about a boyfriend leaves them, a girlfriend leaves them, or somebody writes something on the internet and they want to, my life is over, you got to talk to them. But if you want to jump off someplace, don't jump off a bridge in Fort Lauderdale. It's so unromantic. Jump off. At least jump off Masada. That's right. Forgive me for saying that. Don't. But they have. You can walk up. It can take a few hours. The Romans built this ramp. The Romans took 2 years to build this ramp to invade them. Before it was just down like this. This is about a half mile long. Herod built it as a summer retreat where you could look over the whole world. And on the south end, we'll see he built a 3-story palace. But here they have libraries, they have ovens, and 900 people lived here for 2 years until the Romans got there. And remember, there was a mass suicide, which was awful. Next. Here's the shuttle. You get on, you buy your ticket. You have to buy a ticket. You buy your ticket for about $3 or $2, and you can go up here. Here's the way you go up, but here's hikers. Tommy walked down. You can touch him at the break. You see here, you get off the cable car, and there are guys that take you around. Next. Here's one of the tourists, smiling. Here's the Dead Sea down there. Next. Masada, among other high cliffs, see? Oh, okay, next. Here is Herod's 3-tiered. This was his luxury vacation.
Wow.
In the summer. The height made it cool. And it was a fortress for him to hide if anybody was after him. And look, it was roofed at the time, and he had it here, a swimming pool. And people had to carry things up to build it. And look at it. But again, Herod was a mean kind of guy, Herod the Great. And so he forced the workers. But it's a magnificent, I think my wife walked down to here. You can, there's a path, you can go down. It's safe, stairs. But it's really scary. It's very high. And if you tumble, you only have one chance. By the way, when I had physics, I calculated that if you jumped off the Empire State Building, it would take 8 seconds. So if you jump, you can go, goodbye, I've changed my mind. Here's Masada next. Here's people walking around. It shows you the buildings where they built Masada. They built a whole little civilization in Masada. Next. Here you can see a good shot, taken probably with a helicopter, of here's the surface of Masada. Here's the 3 layers facing south of Herod's palaces. Herod the Great was the great murderer of Palestine and the great builder. Okay, next. Yeah. Stops it. Let's look for a second at Petra. Petra is in Jordan. It's in Petra, which is in Jordan, a group called the, it's in Edom, and these people, Adumians, cut this building out of the rock. This is not pieces that were added and brought. This is cut out of the rock. And you see Corinthian columns. This is the treasury building. Some have said this is where the Jews will flee when the Antichrist goes after them, but that's speculation. Next. Here, to get into the valley of Petra, you go through the Sick. The Sick is like a mile long, natural cut in the valley. This is about 300 feet high. So here's the kind of place that a company of soldiers, like Thermopylae, could hold back an army, because they have to go through, and in certain places it's half as wide as this room. Half as wide as this room. But look at when you go there with trips, when I would lead trips, we'd say, for $2 you can have a donkey or a horse, will drive you through. And some people said, if they would spend a couple $1,000, but they said, I don't want to spend the $2 for the camel ride to go in. And I would actually, with all the people, I'd say, I'll pay. Get on the horse, get on the camel, $2, I'll pay for you. No. And they would walk. And then, after about 50 feet, because it's cobblestone, it's rocky, Dr. Cohen, my ankle hurts. I can't walk anymore. Well, the camels are gone. Now, what do I do? What do you do? That's a mess. Okay. Here's the paid customers. Okay. We'll take the break to the hour. Tom, we can have the break now. I know this is bad news for the best students. We're going to have a break.